Welcome back to the Definitive 32X Buyer's Guide, a video series covering every game on the 32X in a format intended to help answer the question at hand for everyone watching: is this game for me? This is a multi-part series, with each one covering a specific category, though the games and sometimes the categories are not presented in a particular order. In the description of each video, you can find a table of contents letting you know what video showcases which 32X game. These lists will be updated as new segments release. Also, to try to make these as accessible as possible, I've included timecodes so you can skip right to the game you're most interested in. With that out of the way, let's get started. This is Retro Impressions, the definitive 32X Buyer's Guide, averaging great games with moderate appeal. Holodeck Pool Simulator is a rather unique title, as it's the only pool game on the 32X. In fact, the Sega CD didn't even receive a pool game, though one was planned and not released. So you have this and 4 other options on the Genesis. Clearly you've got a choice to make. Do you go for Holodeck Pool Simulator or one of the other offerings on the Mega Drive? I think it's an answer worth pursuing, so let's look at them all in chronological order. 1992 saw the Mega Drive release of Data East Side Pocket. This was a port of the 80s arcade game and was a quality release. While technically this is a pocket billiards game, Side Pocket is more its own thing than a legitimate arcade port. The game experiences you, by yourself, trying to hit balls in to obtain a high enough score to see the next level. There is also a 2-player mode if you happen to know someone willing. Overall, it's a fine game in its own right, but likely will leave folks disappointed as there's no single-player offering of the most common billiards games. Championship Pool was originally created and released for the Super Nintendo in '93 with a port to the Mega Drive in '94. This one offers a ton of game options and a tournament against a computer-controlled player, but to be frank, it's terrible looking, sounding, and playing. Something released so late in the system's life shouldn't be this bad, but it is. Championship Pool is interesting as a video game, as I certainly have minimum expectations for this kind of gaming experience, and revisiting some of these older ones makes me realize there was a rough path getting to that point. Up next is Minnesota Fat's Pool Legend, released in 1995. What's that, you say? This looks identical to Side Pocket? Well, that's because this is the sequel. Even though this was developed in Japan, the game only saw a North American release on the Mega Drive and didn't contain the Side Pocket branding. Game-wise, it's a full expansion of the original idea, adding in AI opponents to compete against. So, what's a Minnesota Fat, you ask? He was quite well known as a pool hustler in the 60s and 70s. So why a game would feature him well into his 80s and nearing his death is beyond me. Maybe it's safe to say he was and remains the only well-known pool player among non-enthusiasts over the last 100 years. It's also of note that Etta James claimed he was her father throughout her life, and that still remains a mystery. If the name Etta James doesn't ring a bell, she's best known for this song. So yeah, quite an interesting fella. But this is about the game, and it's quite good. You now have a ton of different games to choose from, a story mode where the final boss is Minnesota Fats, and a traditional tournament mode. Really, it has everything you could want or need, and I'm not really sure pool games have gotten any better than this outside of modern visual advancements. I also really enjoy the character art showcased in the top right corner. It's a massive improvement over the original and makes the game feel more immersive, especially when compared to the other offerings. The final release was Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker. Now, in the United States, we mostly play 8 or 9 ball. I don't drink, but I've literally hosted events in hundreds of bars in nearly every single state outside of the Northeast. Snooker is so uncommon, I don't ever recall seeing it played, nor do I have an idea of how it's played. No problem. A good video game should make it easy to pick up a sport you know nothing about. Well, not with Jimmy White. The interface is terrible, and it's much more like a simulation where you're coaching a player than actually playing the game. It looks fun, but it's frustrating, slow, and a bit too boring for my attention span. With the prior 3 mentioned, I could sit there and play even though something like Championship Pool is less than stellar. But not with Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker. It's a hard pass. So how does Holodeck Pool Simulator stack up against the competition? Quite well. While I'm sure you were hoping for a 1930s Chicago gangster theme set in the Star Trek universe, that's not what you're getting. There's not a ton of meat on this bone, with 9-ball being the only offering. There are a few opponents to pick from representing different difficulty ranges. The game looks fine considering the hardware, and mechanically it plays great. So is this the best option? Only if having a 3-dimensional playfield is critically important to you. Otherwise, Side Pocket 2, aka Minnesota Fats Pool Legend, is clearly the best option out there. And I don't think you'll find a better pool game released up to that point. As an added bonus, this game also includes a completely remastered release of the Super Nintendo classic Star Trek, Starfleet, Academy Starship Bridge Simulator. That's right. This is a full-on Star Trek Academy sim where you are a cadet who captains a variety of ships for school exam purposes, making decisions that can result in multiple endings depending on your aggregate exam scores. The ships have a ton of functionality, allowing you to do just about anything you could want or desire. You have complete control over the helm, weapons, engineering, and communications. If you want to reroute power to weapons, you can make it so. As your class requirements vary, there's ample opportunity to fly a variety of ships that all have a distinct feeling to them. Everything about this game is a massive step up from the original. 100%. This is the game you'll want if you're making the choice between the two. The only real flaw is the hit detection. It's quite easy to collide with things such as a space station or planet while still feeling like they're a good distance away. It's kind of annoying, but once it happens a couple of times, you'll get down how close you can actually get before it becomes dangerous, so approach these objects with caution and you'll have a good time. To be quite frank, this is everything you could want and should expect from a game released during this era based on the Starfleet Academy. If you like this kind of stuff, this is a must-own title for the 32X, but I realize it has limited appeal, even to fans of the show. So choose wisely. I think there's an argument to be made that the best arcade-style baseball games during the 3rd and 4th generations were from the Baseball Stars and RBI Baseball series. The NES games are remembered for good reason, as they still hold up considering the hardware limitations. From the NES to the 32X, 9 games were released in the RBI series, and up until RBI Baseball 94, each game improved upon the last. Then came Super RBI Baseball on the Super Nintendo, and RBI Baseball 95 for the 32X. Super RBI Baseball felt like a new concept in the early stages of development, lacking everything you would expect had you played any of the other games in the series. The 32X version had another set of problems. This game was a complete reimagining of the RBI Baseball series, and the result was a mixed bag. Everything players loved and expected from the series had been stripped away, making it one of the worst in the franchise and on a Sega platform. An unfortunate direction that killed the series for nearly 20 years. RBI Baseball on the 32X comes across as a cheap attempt to knock off another iconic Sega baseball game, World Series Baseball with sports talk. And that's a shame because overall World Series hasn't aged well, while the original RBI series continues to be one I recommend folks give a shot. Over the years, my view on the two 32X baseball games has shifted a bit. RBI Baseball isn't a bad game. In fact, it's just fine, and the best baseball game on the 32X. I was a bit bent out of shape to see the series going in a direction I didn't want and have been slightly bitter about it for almost 3 decades now. To be fair, it looks good, sounds good, and plays well. The real issue is if you have a 32X, you have a Genesis, and RBI Baseball 94 is a game you should own as it's a substantially better experience from top to bottom. If you absolutely need a 32X baseball game, this isn't a bad option. And quite arguably, the most enjoyable baseball sim from that era.
Fly ball to right field. Hey!
Spider-Man Web of Fire is an oddity on the 32X, as it's almost always reviewed with price value weighing heavy on the opinion given. Being this is the last game released on the system and Spider-Man remains a hot commodity, it's no surprise the game is highly sought after, and when paying a high price for any game, it's a bit hard to be unbiased about it. So is it worth your time? I think that depends on your expectations for this kind of game. This is an action platformer starring Spider-Man. He can do Spider-Man-like things, but he's certainly weaker than he should be, and that's a bit disappointing. As Spider-Man, you'll struggle with anything more than a one-on-one fight. Your moveset is fairly limited, and playing this as a beat-em-up will leave you feeling defeated because it's incredibly difficult to progress in that manner. There's no spider sense to help either, and the control response has issues creating problems in certain areas. It's 100% playable, it's not a hard game, you'll just run into issues when navigating each level. Sometimes this is minor, other times it can ruin a playthrough. For example, on the oil refinery level, I had repeat issues jumping over the flare stacks. It was like I was a magnet that would snap right to them instead of going over, especially if I was hit with a projectile while in mid-jump. This would have been a small annoyance if not for the fact that they cause serious damage, almost guaranteeing you won't be able to finish the stage if it happens more than once. On the visual end, I really enjoy the presentation, but the recycling of assets on each stage can feel a bit numbing. It's not maximum Carnage bad, but it's easy to get lost when every couple of screens loops to an identical set. For a Spider-Man game from that era, it's solid. For a game in general, it's a bit below average. It isn't too far removed from being something good, and it's one that comes to mind when I imagine games that had all the potential, but fell short, making me wonder if a little bit more time and polish would have given the player a more serviceable experience. So, what do you think? Have you played any of these games? Let me know in the comment section. That's it for now, and as always, thank you for watching Retro Impressions.